So let's hop into it. The NBA Conference Finals is well underway, and let's break down the Western Conference Finals. So I can't. I need to stop saying this. It's not a shocker anymore. The Suns are up 3-1 in a low-scoring affair. The Suns winning 84-80. Chris Paul in his second game back. Overall, in this series, I guess we'll address. I don't know. It's a thing where I'm trying to stop myself from just saying like this underdog Suns team. I mean, they're deserving of the top seed in the playoffs. I think they're the second seed. They're clearly deserving, and I think they'd be the first team since like the 90s or maybe like the late 80s to eliminate both LA teams from the playoffs. I mean, it's just a huge accomplishment. Overall, with the Phoenix Suns, and I guess I'm more looking at long term, and not necessarily in terms of if the Suns can win the NBA title, but as the Suns as a perennial power with Deandre Ayton, with Devin Booker, with the makeup of this team, with Chris Paul being a mentor, have the Suns arrived as a new Western Conference power that we're going to keep seeing for years to come with Monte Williams, just based on the bubble run and based on what they're able to do to the Clippers at this point?
Yeah, I think the answer has to be yes. I mean, the Clippers, you could argue this is another choke job by the Clippers here. Really, they had a great opportunity both in game 1 and game 2 to steal one on the Suns' home court, and that just didn't pan out. Of course, we know Kawhi Leonard has been out this entire series. He was ruled out for game 4 well before game 4 even began, has not played in this series, and that alone has been a major difference. But I think, to answer your question, like for the future moving forward, some of that depends on what happens this offseason. You'd have to imagine the Suns are going to extend Ayton. He's due, I believe, for a contract extension, either this offseason or next. Forgive me, I can't remember which, but that's going to be a significant amount of money to extend him. And then they also have to make the decision about what they're going to do with Chris Paul. You would imagine with the success they're having this year, they're going to try to keep him around because this franchise hasn't tasted this kind of success since the Charles Barkley days in Phoenix. So if the ownership is willing to foot the bill and both extend Ayton and keep Chris Paul around, and big if Chris Paul can stay healthy, there's no reason this Suns team can't lead the West again next year. And I'm not 100% convinced that they need Chris Paul to be one of the top teams in the West this next year. You see guys like Cam Payne stepping up. He had a huge game 2 for this team. Chris Paul returned game 3 in this series. So Cam Payne kept the ship afloat for games 1 and 2. And I don't know that he could do that for this team for an entire season, but maybe through free agency, through him working with another guard, potentially they could have similar production. You won't get that elite level that Chris Paul gives you, but perhaps for the course of the season, it could keep them a top 4 seed. So those are kind of the options that I'm sort of weighing when looking at what this team can do, not only this year, but moving forward into next year. You'd have to think for this year, though, and I don't know if you'll agree with me here, Justin, but I think they are the prohibitive title favorites right now. They look strongest, deepest, most well-balanced team, can kind of score and be a problem on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I feel you there. It's a new era in the NBA where, we're in a new kind of entering a new period. And it's refreshing just because typically what we've seen in the NBA is kind of based on like the dominant star, right? At least in the past, 30 years of the league. So from Jordan to I would say Magic, Bird and Magic to Jordan to LeBron to Kobe. And really now we have a wide range of stars that, anybody can win the title. And I think that's awesome to see. Before getting to the Clippers, because there is some serious stuff to discuss with them, one other thing, and I want to discuss DeAndre Ayton, because we just seen him just really rise at this point you kind of talk about what you've seen with his progression? Because I think he's taken a lot of crap from the beginning of his career, but we've seen him just become a kind of relentless competitor. And it's just really good to see him having 19 points and 22 rebounds. It really, impose his will on the floor. I think that's awesome to see.
Yeah, absolutely. He was the perfect fit and the perfect draft pick. He's starting to live up to that now. I don't know that I'll ever agree that he was the better draft pick compared to Luka, because I think this team could be amazing fielding both Luka Doncic and Devin Booker. I mean, there's no reason they couldn't have had Luka at the point guard and Devin Booker at shooting guard and then run their 3-and-D wings with those two guys and be successful. But I think Ayton has carved himself a role on this team, a very significant role, and he's been given the time that Chris Paul has missed. He's been right in there for the argument of second best player of this team, as he's kind of held these guys together while Chris Paul has missed time. Now, I think he's third if you're looking at that practically and just on paper, but he's really found his fit, and he's a guy that was, heavily criticized by Chris Paul. We know Chris Paul likes to dig into his teammates.
Yeah,
he made a habit of that on the Clippers. We know he and James Harden clashed on the Rockets. So I think Ayton has earned his team's respect, and rightfully so. What are your thoughts on Ayton and his development this playoffs?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's nice to see young players rise to the occasion.
Yeah,
that's awesome. And to see them being, see them being comfortable in the moment, I think it's great to see and really see their maturity rise. So I think it's awesome. Him and Devin Booker, for that matter. Like, saw Booker, ditch the mask, and these are high pressure situations. Against this, the Clippers are not just some fluke team. I mean, they are perennial favorite there. You have Paul George. This is not a situation in which they're facing some other Cinderella team that's not expected to be there. So there's a lot of pressure for the Suns to face. So if they win Game 5, I mean, this is I think a pretty legitimate victory on the Phoenix Suns' part. I want to jump to. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Just before we get off Ayton had the most critical play in this series in that Game 2. I'm sure you remember the buzzer beater dunk.
Yeah,
with I believe it was like 0.7 of a second left on the clock. I might be wrong about that, but it was less than a second. Jay Crowder lobs it in from the corner.
Pass.
Somehow they let Ayton around the bucket. I don't care if you have to foul. You keep him away from the bucket.
It's true.
Jay Crowder lobs it up. Incredible buzzer beater play. A dunk off of the inbounds. You hardly ever see that. And that gave the Suns the commanding series lead, up 2-0 with Chris Paul coming back for Game 3. The Suns then did lose Game 3. Paul George had a great performance. Yes, I'll give credit where credit's due there for Paul George. And let's be honest, Kawhi and his unfortunate knee injury has been the letdown for the Clippers this series. I think without Kawhi, I would have never picked them against the Suns. I picked the Suns to win this series, assuming Kawhi would be back maybe by Game 3, and that hasn't happened yet. So I think that's a huge story. But Ayton, like we both agree, has really proven his worth through this series.